morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me start with a big thanks to the organizers for having us here. We'll be discussing an important topic around petrochemicals, especially how to make the business model for petrochemicals future-proof. Today we have an esteemed panelist with us. In the interest of time, I'll not introduce each of them, and we'll get straight into discussion. Let me set a quick context on petrochemicals. Today in India, petrochemicals, we see a lot of tailwinds as well as headwinds. If I talk about tailwinds, we are still an importing country. There is a significant growth of petrochemicals that is expected over the next few years. Especially in last 5 years, we are seeing a lot of petrochemical build happening in India. Pretty much all refineries are already integrated or have solid plans to integrate into petrochemicals. If we talk a little bit about tailwinds or how the landscape is evolving, there are several petrochemicals where we are getting balanced or surplus, but there are several others we are completely 100% dependent. So the growth of petrochemicals is not even and aligned with the demand that the country has. Second important thing, feedstock still remains a challenge, and that's why in the country we see most of the petrochemicals coming adjacent to the refineries. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, how we can address. And third, very important one, sustainability related to the emissions, related to the recycling is another thing. So we have a challenging task of, maintaining rapid capacity expansion along with, sustainability and the net zero and the feedstock challenges that need to be solved. And that's the area which we'll dwell into a little bit more. Without too much time, let me straight jump into questions. And Manu, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, you have seen petrochemicals very close as HMEL. You have, multiple assets now up and running. How do you see this sector evolving going forward, especially over next 2 decades? We talk a lot about Atmanirbharta. Do you see us becoming self-sufficient in petrochemicals?
Yeah, so thank you, Sudeep. I think petrochemicals is a sector which is going to grow significantly. And that's because, that's because the country itself is growing, and the growth rates that we are projecting is maybe about 7%, 8%. And then if you look at petrochemical growth, based on the GDP alone, it's about 1.3 to 1.5 times of GDP, so about 9, 10, 11%, depending on the year and the policies. Besides, the country is also sort of urbanizing, and we have more of people coming to the cities, more of quality standards rising. So if you look at it, in a way, our journey itself is a reflection of how evolution in petrochemical sector is happening. We started off as a refinery, HMEL, and then we added in our refinery, we had a petrochemical unit, which would take feed from the FCC. And thereafter, we've added now a petrochemical complex, 1.2 million tons of ethylene. As a result, now the whole complex is an integrated complex, right? And this is what we are seeing across countries. Across the country, many players now have added their polypropylene units, FCC units, and then perhaps going forward they will add. So the growth is there. I think what we need to be a little bit cautious about is what's happening outside the country. And there we are going to see pressures coming back into India where people will want to sell volume to India, and we will have to be cost competitive, right? So the way we see it, growth is there. There's immense potential, but you will have to be competing on costs.
Thank you, Manu. Feedstock is one of the biggest challenge in the country, and we'll spend some time talking and discussing about ways and means. Mr. Khanna, I'll go to you next. with looming energy transition, refineries are increasingly thinking about increasing the petrochemical intensity. BPCL, your organization, has already ventured into petrochemical integration with, announcement of the BINA project. Can you please elaborate on that? How far can we push the refineries? Can we solve feedstock problem through more and more petrochemicals coming out of refineries?
Thank you, Sudeep. And thanks, VP, for giving me this opportunity. For any petrochemical complex, there are two challenges are there. First and foremost, ensure the feedstock security. And second is the management of byproduct. And when it is interlinked with the refinery, I think these two becomes the opportunity for refinery and lot of integration can happen. Of late, we were hearing for, option like crude oil to chemical and wherein your 70% conversion is, more than 70% is assured. But it is yet to see the, commercial viability and PTR is yet to be proven. Coming back to the question about how much refiner can push through, just to give a perspective now when we are going for BINA refinery petrochemical complex, wherein we will be increasing the crude capacity from 7.5 to typically 10.5, say 3 million we are going, and we will be having 2.2 petchem. So when I look at that number, the petrochemical intensity for the incremental crude will be close to 66% will be there. So, and in order to make it more and more cost effective, we are ensuring that our future project should have a flexibility to process wide range of feed. Now, when we'll be having the LPG grade going from west coast to east coast, we will be having tap off for our refinery for LPG. We'll be having RLNG. We will be having option to receive naphtha from our Mumbai refinery. So, in short, I think the future petchem will be having the provision to process wide range of feedstock to make it more and more cost-effective production.
Thank you, Mr. Khanna. In addition to refineries, one of the way people have been talking about is import of feedstock. We have seen some of those examples already playing out in Europe, but also in India, thinking about importing ethane and propane from US, Middle East and other places and then putting a cracker in front of them. Reliance is already doing it in India, where they have set up the entire supply chain. Recently, we have seen another announcement from Petronet LNG trying to do the same. Let me go to Mr. Singhal next. Mr. Singhal, you've been associated with GAIL and you're very close to this gas supply chain. How do you see the feasibility of importing ethane, propane and other feedstock? And what I really want you to touch upon is there a feasibility in terms of economics, and how will the risks pan out, especially depending on an entire import-dependent supply chain for large investments?
So I'll address the last point first. As you said, what are the risks associated with this import of ethane? So as far as ethane is concerned, the biggest risk is perhaps that US is the only exporter of ethane as on this date. So if somebody is making the choice of feedstock with ethane, then this is, perceive as the biggest risk, that this is only one supplier. So perhaps the chance of more competition or negotiation goes down. But on the positive side, the projection says that there will be enough ethane available from US. There is no need to worry about, and there are 2-3 manufacturers who are well integrated into the entire value chain who can provide long-term ethane as well. The only immature part in ethane is still now that we still do not have much of spot market. So if you want to balance your production and say tie up, as any long-term strategy would be that you have 70-80% of your entire requirement on long-term basis and keep 20% on flexible basis so that you can take advantage of price fluctuation. But that will not be possible because there is not enough spot market in ethane. But yes, going forward, I think that is the way forward because traditionally, though India has been using naphtha as feedstock for cracker, but times are changing and in order to be more cost competitive and more having better yield, it is necessary to switch to ethane. And I think all future plants which will be coming up will definitely be considering ethane, propane and butane. So we are doing one with import of propane also, wherein we will be manufacturing polypropylene using PDHPP technology for the first time in the country. So yes, I see no problem. The only thing is if we want to consider the cost-wise, again ethane is not going to be cheaper than gas because ethane rejection in US will happen only if there is some incentive for them to sell ethane. Otherwise, they will prefer to sell it as natural gas only. So therefore, ethane is definitely going to be a little costlier. But then in the entire value chain, we will end up saving some money because liquefaction of ethane is much cheaper compared to liquefaction of natural gas. So liquefied ethane will be available more or less at the same rate at which LNG will be available. And then again on transportation front, perhaps some saving can be ensured if we are doing ethane import. So cost-wise, I think it is okay, and there's not really much risk available. The choice is now on the petrochem producers that when they start switching or having more adoption towards newer feedstock.
Thank you, Mr. Singhal. Just continuing on the theme of feedstock, another opportunity that is being talked about is why not set up plants next to the feedstock-rich regions. And we have seen examples of that in fertilizer industries where, Indian players have gone and done strategic investments and partnerships in Africa and other places. Let me go to Mr. Rajiv Agarwal. Mr. Rajiv Agarwal, do you think setting up plants in Middle East or US which are blessed with feedstock, is that a viable option for Indian players to drive the self-sufficiency for the domestic consumption?
As far as my opinion goes, you're right. Where the feedstock cost advantage is there, obviously the economics works out to be better. But at the same time, you have to look into the demand centers also. Because the demand center is stationed in India, you have to, it also involves the cost of transportation of the polymers that you generate there. So, I don't think that many people are really thinking the way, the fertilizer you're talking about. Because in case of fertilizer, really, the 80 to 80% cost is coming from the natural gas itself. So if the natural gas is available at $1.5 or something, obviously it makes a lot of impact on the final urea price. But in case of, petrochemicals, the same situation would not be there. First of all, the basic advantage with the petrochemicals is that they can be based on the multiple feeds, which I think my fellow panelists also have, have deliberated on this issue. So, in India, we find that there are a lot of opportunities where, the integration of the refineries is possible with the petrochemicals, and that is how we're seeing the trend that is coming up. And currently, the refineries are sitting up at a 5% intensity of petrochemicals, and which can easily be achieved to be 20-25% with the, all the technologies being available. And in fact, we are, as EIL, we are working on some of these petrochemical complexes. The one which Mr. Manu Sehgal also, Manu Sehgal told about integration of that Bathinda refinery with the cracker complex, and another grassroots that we are putting up in Barmer refinery. So, that has a petrochemical intensity of 26%. So, there the ultimate feedstock becomes the crude. And for any industry to run, both factors should be worked. The reliability of the feedstock is also very much. So, I think the way probably the future petrochemical industry will grow in India especially will be because there will be a demand of refineries also. There's going to be let us say the fuel demand is also going to increase, especially in case of diesel. The gasoline also demand is going to go up for another few years till the electrified vehicles take over. So I mean, where, for another at least 2 decades in India, we see there is a rise for the both refinery capacity as well as a, tremendous increase in the petrochemical intensity. And therefore, I think the lot of petrochemical production will come from the integrated refineries, which will also, I mean, give a constant supply of the feedstock at a reasonable price, because the crude is available from multiple sources, so it will always be priced at this thing. And at the same time, as Mr. Khanna also told, that the incremental crude, I mean, that he's talking of Bina, it is actually giving a 60% conversion to petrochemical. So that brings in the profitability of these complexes.
Got it. Thank you. I mean, continuing the theme of feedstock, I think with all the sustainability related pressures, people are talking about using non-fossil based feedstock for petrochemicals. So using bio-based feedstock, other agri-waste feedstock. And Arun, I'd like to come to you. You've been close to, how the technologies are developing. It would be good to demystify this bio-based feedstock, especially what would like to hear your views on where are we today in terms of technology and economic feasibility to really use bio-based feedstock for petrochemicals. And how do you see this going forward? Is there a case on horizon for a sizable bio-based, petrochemical production in the near future?
Thanks, Sudeep. This is in Indian context. I mean, biomass. India has one of the largest biomass. Energy is the third largest energy producer after China and United States. And now with the Indian government support and subsidies, biomass to biofuel is being talked about and is being worked by many players in India. Reliance has just announced. Also, they're going big time into it. As far as technologies, ethanol is already being used and still not met the 20% target, so it has potential to grow. Biodiesel is a challenge for many reasons, feed availability and the product properties. So India still has a target to maintain 5% diesel blend, a biodiesel blend in the diesel pool. I think it's still less than 0.58%. So that's a long ways to go. But ethanol to jet technology exists. We have commercially proven ethanol to jet as a Chevron Lummus Global with Lummus, which is not very cost effective right now, but has potential to grow from ethanol to jet. And then, of course, you can co-process, because that's where you start off, like fats, oil, and greases. In a HAFA, in a hydrotreater, you have existing hydrotreaters and hydrocrackers. So co-processing of some of these limited feedstock, again, those feedstocks are not as scalable, not as much as the fossil. So, but you can co-process 5 to 10% in an existing unit and make, if you want to make naphtha, you can make naphtha towards petrochemical or make diesel, some SAF. So that's, and then lignocellulosic, which is a solid based biomass, is also catching up, but still technology for that is not yet there. Europe is working big time on that. So, and then e-fuels, e-fuel is Fischer-Tropsch, BTL, and CTL and GTL, all there exist, but still not economically viable, especially on the e-fuel side for the coming at least 10 years or so. But for all this biomass-based or biofuel-based, you need hydrogen, because they all feed come with oxygen, which hydrogen is used much in a cups per barrel basis or normal meter cube per meter cube basis, much higher than a conventional. So green hydrogen is essential for if you want to even process or consider that. So which I think India is already taking the right steps towards that. Thanks.
Just, Arun, staying with you, just a follow-up on that. Fuels, we see a lot of push bio. Chemicals, do you think there is a sizable bio portion that can emerge over the next 10 years?
I mean, bio-naphtha is what I see as far as what I am, but nothing as at a large scale.
Thank you. Let me shift gears a little bit. We'll talk about products. I think one of the things we see in Indian petrochemical industry is most of the players have gravitated so far towards polyethylene and polypropylene and some of these bulk chemicals. It makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of demand. Technology is easily licensable, and that's why we have seen. But now we are getting to a stage where some of these chains may become surplus, while there are several other chains that are underdeveloped due to technological reasons, due to other reasons. Bryan, related to that, my question to you is, do you see that changing forward where, India will start getting into a lot more specialty derivatives? And if you can throw some light on why not, what needs to change?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that India is going to go forward to more specialty derivatives, and I think as other industries grow, moving beyond base petrochemical production in India becomes more and more critical. I think the challenge for some of these applications, more in the specialty applications so far, is as you pointed out, where ethylene, propylene technologies and polymerization technology are readily licensable today. As you move further down these petrochemical chains, generally that technology is held by a small number of players who are producers themselves. And so I think about licensing and refining in petrochemicals. A company like Honeywell, specifically Honeywell UOP, is in the business of developing technologies and licensing it broadly to anyone that's got an interest in practicing. In most of the smaller chemical plays, that's just not the case. And that technology is shared via joint ventures, maybe sometimes licensing, usually some sort of an equity arrangement. And so that remains a possibility or a route for bringing technologies into India. But I think maybe the bigger opportunity today is that so much of the world around energy and chemicals are changing that it's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for more and more Indian players to enter the market with their own technologies, right? We've seen the petrochemical industry grow enormously over the past couple of decades, and companies that are in that space, BPCL is a great example, have developed increasingly sophisticated R&D operations, technology operations. Along the way that we make petrochemicals is potentially going to change, right? We see a focus today on low carbon intensity, which was never a driver, other than for cost, was never a driver for petrochemicals. We see emergence of a lot of plays for bio-based materials, and bio-based materials for fuels is a bit of a challenge based on volume. Bio-based routes for especially petrochemicals is much easier. I think about even at Honeywell UOP, if I just think about the fuel space, we recently announced our 50th license for a renewable fuels project, and across those 50 projects, that relates to about 500,000 barrels of renewable plants that have been designed, and there's nearly 200,000 barrels of capacity that's actually up in operation today. When we think about fuels, that's not a lot, but when we start to think about specialty petrochemicals, that starts to be a lot. And so the opportunity to today focus on developing technologies that are low carbon intensity, potentially bio-based, maybe circular in nature, I think it's much easier to think about the industry growing here, the potential to work with, let's say, a company like Honeywell UOP, who's got the experience on scale-up, could help an Indian producer that wants to get into specialty chemicals be able to scale that and more quickly
come to something that's a real commercial opportunity, as well as a huge number of startups today that are trying to do things, especially in bio. So I think the opportunities to break into that with the paradigm changes that we see today are greater than ever, and I think it represents a change in direction and a change in opportunity for Indian producers who don't want to have to enter into agreements, equity or joint venture agreements with people that hold the technology today.
Thank you, Bryan. Let's hear maybe from, customers' perspective. Mr. Khanna, I'd like to come to you. BPCL started actually on a reverse way, right? First, you set up relatively niche petrochemicals with acrylates and oxo-alcohols. And now you're getting into the large-scale petrochemicals with Bina. What have been the reasons? What's the thought process? And if I can request, given we are running out of time, if we can keep it relatively sharp and crisp.
When we had planned for our petrochemical journey way back in 2011-12, we found that everybody was going through the polypropylene route, and we wanted to travel a less traveled path, and we decided to go for other way. So we had gone for acrylic acid route and go for the acrylate. And the reasons were the demand was very high. It was totally import substitute, and there were relatively less competition in that arena. Definitely it had its own challenges because market was not that developed, and the technology had its own challenges because it was the first ever biggest unit by the licensor, and even the technology was not way the bulk petrochemical technologies mature, it wasn't to that stage. We had a lot of challenges, but our team along with the marketing, they overcame, and today the product is well established. Fast forward to 23-24 when we are looking for it. Now we want to be one of the major player, and we know that it cannot be routed through the niche petrochemical. So that is how we switch over, that we would like to go for bulk. At the same time, it is also a natural hedge for amidst all the discussion on energy transition. We know that it can be a natural hedge in the long term. And recently we got one study done how the future is there for the petchem in India and as well as in the world. And we found that based on the ease of establishing as well as the market attractiveness, we found that the bulk petrochemicals still hold good ground even today and for the future. And based on that, we had taken a call that we will be expanding our future in the bulk petrochemical. Having said that, we know that in the given option of niche petrochemical, what we have done, we are looking for super niche petrochemical in form of super absorbent polymer, the technology which is developed by our own R&D, and along with the EIL, we are working on it for going for super niche petrochemical product called super absorbent polymer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khanna. Let me change tracks a little bit. We'll delve deeper into the sustainability, and maybe I'll start with Mr. Arun Arora. Globally, we are seeing a lot of announcements of net zero, even by the petrochemical players, depending on the geography, 2040, 2050, thereabouts. Would be great to hear from you, what are the technologies and pathways that people are thinking about, and how do you see this evolving forward?
Okay, so I'll try to be short. Today, everybody wants profit, more profit, but at lower carbon footprint. That's the trend. So petrochemical make itself offers one of that route to capture the carbon instead of going into fuels. Fuels can be made by bio or other electric vehicles and all that. But as far as technology, the refining industry is 100 years old, more than. And most of the unit processes in the refining are at least 20 to 30, maybe 50 years old. So the time has come to rethink and change those norms. And that's where this new technology, which we have, what's called highly integrated, doesn't make sense to reduce your scope 1, scope 2 emission to first make products, cool it, most of it, cool it, store it, then again heat it, then again pressure it, go to your steam cracker or go to your other petrochemical products. So integration, and that's the technology exists, thermal crude to chemical, which is highly integrated. We have eliminated crude tower, vacuum tower. We don't really need to invest energy in separating. Everything goes towards petrochemical. So that's one groundbreaking technology which I think towards petrochemical and saving your scope 1, scope 2. And I think India recently announced PCPIRs, the 4 PCPIRs. That's another approach to capture some of the points mentioned, the ecosystem, the feed, and how the downstream synergy can be integrated. So hubs with the help of technologies like TC2C, I think the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 is made by the products, what you make.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. Mr. Singhal, similar question. How do you see that in Indian context?
I think we will have to work towards CCS in order to get a little competitive edge also using sustainability. So, but a lot of R&D is happening to utilize CO2 and make some chemicals. So that will be one way. And in addition to this, I think next that is happening is, of course, switching to renewable power. So that is also happening everywhere. These two remains the major focus. Then some part perhaps people will try to do it utilizing, biogas also. So these three things I feel are the most important, most significant to cut down the CO2 emissions in petrochemicals especially.
Thank you, Mr. Singhal. We heard views on scope 1, scope 2, but in a chemical industry, 70% of the emissions are related to scope 3 or the product itself. And Manu, coming back to you, right, one of the big thing in terms of scope 3 is how can we promote the circular economy? And if you talk about plastics and polymer, it boils down to some shape or form of recycling other than the feedstock. What are your thoughts on recycling? Especially would be good to hear what role do you see petrochemical producers playing it? We already see municipalities, government, trying to encourage this ecosystem, but where do you see petrochemical players fitting into this entire scheme and what's their role?
Yeah, so I think it's essential that there is some sort of circularity. If you look at nature, everything sort of goes through a full cycle and it's sort of recircled. For petrochemicals, the principle is established that we need to do it, but I think the issues are many, particularly starting from how to collect it, how to bring it back, then how to sort of purify it and then reprocess it. And then in all of it, like Mr. Arora mentioned, profitability is also a factor. You want to look at it, whether there is some profit there or not. So as producers, we can work to take more volume, which is coming out of circular plastics, and reprocess them. But like I said, challenges remain in terms of virgin plastics are pure, and then when you're using recirculated plastics, there are issues around what are the additives inside and all that. So it's an evolving field. We are sort of focused on it. As it evolves, we will try and maximize as much as possible.
Thank you, Manu. Bryan, coming next to you, we talked about CCS, renewable, recycling, but are there technologies that are emerging where the production process itself can be made less energy intense? How do you reduce the carbon footprint of the asset itself?
Yeah, I think there isn't really time to do the topic justice, but I would say that in general, both fuel and petrochemical technologies, I think there's a strong drive today and a lot of work that's being done to just naturally bring the carbon intensity of processes down. You see in integration of petrochemicals into refining, whether it's the thermal route that was discussed, or whether it's catalytic routes that we would propose. those all focus on dramatically reducing the carbon intensity. Schemes for renewable feedstocks into petrochemicals, renewable feedstocks into feed, bio-based feeds, and just designing plants today for very, very low energy consumption and maximum petrochemicals all lead in that direction. So I would say that's really the focus of the industry, whether it's people that are designing units today or people that are implementing plants today. I think everyone is putting a lot of effort into achieving that goal.
Thank you, Bryan. We are seeing a lot of petrochemical builds that are expected in India over next 5 years. One of the questions that we often get asked is, how can I build my petrochemical assets so that when sustainability and the carbon tax becomes important, I have the ability to retrofit or switch. Next, I want to go to Mr. Rajiv Agarwal. You have been part and parcel of several of these CAPEX builds. Your response to this question, how can, what are technologies or, upcoming technologies which people can, think about, make flexibility in their upcoming assets so that 10 years down the line, those assets will still make sense or can be retrofit easily from a sustainability point of view?
Yeah, I think because we have been working on several configurations along with for our several clients. I mean, this issue is now being hotly debated that because this net zero is a target for the entire country which we have to meet. So how to make those, especially the steam crackers and all, they are very, very extensive in terms of their fuel consumption, energy consumption. There is a high carbon intensity associated with the current designs. So we have been working on this along with the several licensors, and there are many, many ways to actually reduce the carbon footprint of the steam crackers and the entire petrochemical complex. I mean, the first thing that probably will be done in this area will be the electrification part, where because currently the most of the drives in the steam cracker is run on steam. But I think in the future we will see most of these compressors will be run on electric drives. Of course, the challenges are because now the type of cracker, the complex, the crackers are going to be mega size in the coming future. So I mean the sizes of the motors will be also enormous, and I mean those kind of motors. So I mean if you look into it, that motors up to 25, 30 megawatts. I mean, we are replacing those steam turbines with motors and assuming that this power will come from the renewable sources. So it will lead to part decarbonization of these steam cracker complexes. Apart from that, I think it will also, ways are that, that instead of generating steam in the cracker furnaces, I mean, people are now focusing on air preheating to reduce the overall fuel consumption in those furnaces, and that will also reduce the carbon footprint of these crackers. Apart from that, I mean, the people are also thinking of, let us say, even which I think will take, if the price of the hydrogen is really, I mean, something which can be talked of, that, I mean, hydrogen-fired furnaces, which will also reduce the carbon emission from these furnaces. And I think lastly, probably, I mean, which probably will take another a decade or so, that even the entire furnaces are being thought of being replaced by electrical furnaces, because these are very, very high duty, 150 million, 200 million kilocalories duties, they're the kind of. So I mean, we are expecting that in another 10 years, even these furnaces will be replaced maybe by electric. That is how the carbon intensity will be reduced.
Thank you. I know we have run out of time, but before we end, a quick round of applause for the panelists to making out time and sharing their views. Thank you.